This is the Miller Philosopher. The already controversial show Rings of Power added another hot take to its list with the brief depiction of an orc mother with her child. While only a couple seconds long and playing no further part in the episode, some Tolkien fans were upset by what they perceived as the humanization of the orcs. This is despite the fact that every fan knows that Tolkien outright says in the Silmarillion that orcs produce like humans and elves do. I think the reason this is so disturbing, though, is because it hits directly on an unspoken yet uncomfortable truth in Tolkien's works, something that's always been there but is never really talked about: the concept of orc morality and genocide. Though there is a canon definition for the creation of the orcs and what they are, perversions of the elves by Morgoth turned into extensions of his evil, Tolkien in his later notes starts to question that premise that he laid down, because it contradicted an earlier premise that he had also laid down, that nothing starts out as evil, but rather as corrupted into it. He died, sadly, before he could finalize any conclusive thought about it. But to me, this shows that he was beginning to grapple with his depiction of orcs in his published writings. In universe, the hatred of the orcs is universal amongst all the other races, and for good reason. Orc armies have been warring with everyone or terrorizing them in small bands since their creation in the First Age, and it never changes. In the Silmarillion, for example, Haleth, as the new default leader of the Haladin, implies heavily to her elven rescuer, Caronthir, that the fate of any who are killed by the armies of Morgoth are basically having their bodies cut up and devoured, including her own father and brother. When Turin is betrayed by Mime after he betrays his rebel group to the orcs, and the dwarf tries to barter a deal that they spare Turin, the orc leader responds in almost a sadistic and cruel tone: "Assuredly, Turin, son of Hurin, shall not be slain." The beginning of the War of the Arneath Arnordiad starts out with orcs butchering a captive elf lord right in front of the waiting elven armies on the other side, an act that is almost similarly repeated much later on in the Third Age by how the orc army then turns the body of Celebrimbor into a banner full of arrows. And Elrond's wife is captured and tortured by orcs before she is rescued, but is so badly hurt and scarred, both physically and I believe spiritually and mentally, by the experience that she decides to peace out to Valinor. So yeah, the portrayal and perception of the orc race and universe is not at all unfounded. And for the readers and or viewers, this naturally feeds into our perception, into their portrayal as one-dimensional villains for our heroes to kill off. Tolkien scholar Shippey says that almost certainly to supply the heroes with a continual round of enemies whom which the reader feels no compulsion to feel bad for to be killed off. Or, in Tolkien's own words during a 1936 lecture, the monsters and the critics, the infantry of the old war, ready to be slaughtered. Therefore, this allows us, as again, the readers and viewers, to feel relatively comfortable that we have no sympathy for the orcs and that they are legitimately evil and they get what's coming to them. However, in universe, the reality that the orcs have children never changed. It's just not shown or discussed in any real detail so as to create any sympathy for us to feel for them. The closest I think that we come to that is the orc warlord Azog and his son Bolg from their long-standing conflict with the dwarves that is talked about in the annals in Return of the King. And even then, they're still presented as evil and cruel. It's only natural, therefore, to not want to see the orcs as being humanized, or rather, given reason to feel some level of pity and compassion for them. Honestly, the only time I felt anything of the sort was the first generation of elves that got tortured and twisted by Morgoth. they truly didn't ask what happened to them and didn't know what was going to happen in the future. And though later on it does say that orcs hated their Dark Lords, even without them, they still chose to act evilly. But the real thorn that the Rings of Power image presents its viewership with is the unspoken conclusion of their genocide. If orcs are having children in the manner of a Yuvatar, then that means for certain that they too are getting killed off en masse, on sight, thanks to the actions of their parents. And while yes, the sensitivity to more cultural nuance is very loud in 2024, this idea too was not foreign to Tolkien either. The Misty Mountains War in the Third Age between the Dwarves and the Orcs is described in the Annals of Return of the King as being extremely brutal even for Middle-earth warfare standards, with no quarter given by either side. Or, in other words, it was kill on sight on nitro. So yes, this means any orc, and yes, dwarven children that got caught up in this were going to die. This literal race war was so extreme that it's rarely talked about by any who knew of it, and when it is, it's spoken with a certain chill of the soul. In the real world, people watch these shows to escape somehow, or get away from reality, to become detached, even for a short while, from the unpredictable nuances that life brings that may or may not go in their favor. For Lord of the Rings fans, this can be especially true. Middle-earth is a fictional fantasy world after all. So, perhaps the brief image of an orc mother and child are but brief flashes of where our reality meets the fantasy. Flashes of an unspoken but implied reality that Tolkien himself both built into his stories and was further considering expounding upon before he passed. But let me know your thoughts below. This is the Miller Philosopher. Have a good day.